This podcast may contain disturbing content for some listeners. It's intended for mature audiences. Listener discretion is advised. This is True Crime XS.
There's a lot of interesting true crime news stuff that's gone on. I am going to put a piece of it as the tail, and somebody asked me about that the other day. I guess they didn't realize we did that. That's the coda at the end of the episode, so it plays like the last credits, and then sometimes there'll be most of the time there's something after the credits. I'm going to put some true crime stuff back there today, but this is going to be part 2 of our interview with Katrina. And where we left off there was her aunt's case. Like, she's the namesake of someone who was written off as a cocaine overdose, but she was found in the trunk of a car. And, you know, it's an old case. This case goes back to 1985 to Dallas, Texas. What did you think of sort of the story we've covered so far?
I'm familiar with the case, and it's really sad. And sort of speaking with Katrina, the niece of the victim, it really brought a lot of things to light, and it's a little different than what I'm used to. Katrina, that we're speaking with, who is the niece of the victim of the crime, she didn't actually know her aunt. She was deeply affected through how it affected her mother, right? Who was the victim's sister. The case to me is, you've got a young woman who, she basically was going out of town and she had borrowed her boyfriend's car, and then the car was found sitting in an alleyway, and someone had noticed it, and the police got involved. I know there's an official account, and then there's some ambiguity between what really happened and what was stated to have happened. But ultimately, they checked the trunk of the car, and Katrina is in the trunk of the car. Her death is basically chalked up to a suicide or an overdose. And, we find out that her toxicology report after her autopsy indicated that she didn't have any drugs in her system, right? And so she didn't overdose. I don't really see how that's possible if the tox is clean. And then you don't commit suicide and put yourself in the trunk of a car.
You know, you and I have come across these cases over the years where, whether it's a missing person that's never been found or it's a questionable discovery of human remains, we kind of look at it and we go, all right, well, something accidental could have happened here. And the accident, whoever witnessed it or was a part of it, they sort of panic. And this case, it's really difficult for me to see it that way. I mean,
she had no drugs in her system, so if she didn't overdose, I guess there are other types of accidents that could happen. Because when we talk about stuff like that, I always imagine people partying in their head while they're high and somebody overdosing, right?
Yeah, we've talked about that at length on here.
But I think maybe there could be other ways that people could accidentally die while hanging out, and people not wanting to have authorities involved for various reasons. But I think there's evidence of that kind of thing on the body when that happens. Like, if somebody falls down the stairs, they're going to be pretty banged up, right? That kind of thing.
Yeah, or if there's an accidental gun discharge, there's going to be a bullet wound. Like, there's all sorts of things that you can get into. And I'm not going to speculate too far into how high risk a lifestyle the aunt had in this case, but I do want to I want to sort of put on the other part of the interview here. And at the end of the show, at the tail, there is a call to action for this. And a call to action, for people who don't know, it's when we ask you to do something. There's a petition involved here that she's had running for some time where she's trying to get more information about this case. And I think I mentioned that when you and I were talking, that this reminds me of Janet Hawley down in Texas. Janet Hawley was the sister of Sandy Dial. And essentially, Janet had to do a lot of the investigation into Sandy's murder on her own. And because of how this has unfolded for Katrina with the loss of her mom, she is the one who sort of ends up in the position of trying to put all of this together. And she's hoping that this petition will get the attention of the right people in Dallas so that they will take it a little more seriously in terms of getting what paperwork is available together and sort of treating this like it deserves a homicide investigation, which I'm in complete agreement with her, and I think you are as well.
I agree. I do. I agree that this never should have been dropped like it was, regardless of what the reasoning was. Unless I'm missing some pretty substantial pieces of information, which I mean, I guess is possible, but I don't think that's the case. Unless I'm missing some pretty substantial pieces of information, they just let it slip through the cracks, in my opinion.
Yeah, so this is one of the first times I can confidently say that either through incompetence or malfeasance, somehow this case was not investigated properly at the time. And I think I get a really good perspective, even though there's some distance between the two Katrinas, Katrina we're interviewing and Katrina the victim. I do think this is a really good perspective, and it's sort of a neutral perspective in some ways of how crime affects not only the victims, who in this case, she lost her life, but also affects the families sort of through the years, generationally. There's an interesting affect to how that tragedy sort of carries forward. So let's listen to the rest of this interview now, and then we'll be back at the end of the show to talk about some other stuff. Where we left off in what's either the last segment or the last episode is pointing out that this clearly, toxicology-wise, is not a cocaine overdose that your aunt has died of in 1985.
Correct.
So where did the police investigation go from there?
Good question.
I'm going to guess nowhere.
I think you're correct.
Which is absolutely unacceptable. And I want to understand completely. At this point in time, your grandmother would have been in Kansas, and your aunt would have died in Dallas County, Texas. Is that correct?
Yeah, Dallas County and City, yeah.
Okay, so there's some distance there as far as her being able to, just walk into the police station and talk to them about it, right? Because she got
and I think that in the article in the newspaper, it said that when they had spoke with my grandmother, she had stated that she didn't know what my aunt was doing since she left Kansas, which I think was misleading. I think that they told her daughter died of a cocaine overdose, and it was more like I guess I don't know what my daughter's been doing since she left Kansas type of reaction, because I know my grandma and I know how she says things and words things, and that is not something she would have disclosed that way. And I think that the reporter writing it, whoever that was, just worded it to their,
right. It was their understanding of the narrative. I completely understand. If you've got it, so the police are saying we have a cocaine overdose, completely disregarding how she was found, because at the very least, somebody had to have put her there.
That's illegal regardless. Not
right?
That it matters whether she died of a cocaine overdose or not. It's still illegal to put a body in a trunk.
Right. And I think that, that is sort of my thinking. Even and your aunt's toxicology report came back that she did not overdose from cocaine. And in my mind, that I mean it is important to know that, but even if she did, there's still a crime happening here.
Amen. Exactly.
And it is outrageous to me that it's not being treated that way. And I feel like, regardless of who you are, and regardless of whether you have somebody from, like, anybody advocating and kind of speaking out to, have your case investigated and solved, there's stuff in this situation that should have led investigators on their own to think we need to look into this further. And it doesn't even come out until you find out that her toxicology report didn't reflect any sort of overdose. Well,
Correct.
normal young vital healthy women don't just die. I mean,
Exactly. And it was noted she had no like health issues, no health concerns, no type of disease or cancer or anything like that that would have caused her death either.
I feel like law enforcement coming from the perspective that, like, they can sort of write this off, which is what it sounds like has happened, into the inevitable, because you're the reason if something's going to happen that it's going to happen. It's not like anybody's going back and doing this because they're law enforcement and that's what they should be doing. And to me, that's
Exactly.
absolutely ridiculous. They should be very, very concerned that, even though it has been almost 40 years, that in 1985, this young lady, this young woman ended up in the trunk of a vehicle.
Well, she actually lived across town as well. So she was legally blind without glasses or contacts, and both of which were still on her nightstand, like across Dallas, Texas. So she could not have driven herself there anyway.
So that just adds even more to the fact that the explanation doesn't meet the situation.
Exactly. So many like wrong turns here. It's unbelievable.
So is the idea okay? So she's in the trunk of a car. She's wrapped in a bed sheet, based on the media report and the autopsy report.
Hmm.
The autopsy report had some even more interesting stuff in it from what you shared with me that doesn't make it into the media.
Hmm.
You want to talk about that?
Sure. I haven't actually really disclosed that anywhere yet. And for example, like the petition I started was over a year ago now. And so I didn't have a lot of the information when I started the petition that I have now, which also might be why you've seen articles or something that might have more information than others. Because as it's been found out or learned or discovered, it's changed even more type of thing. But yeah, she when she was found in the trunk of the car, nude, naked, and wrapped up in a white bed sheet, she had a belt around her neck
You're kidding
as
me.
well. So yeah, and I didn't find that out until just a few months ago, if that.
And so that's just even more obvious that she didn't overdose on cocaine. I mean, there's
So
Yeah, I don't think it was her cause of death though either, which is even more confusing. I mean, it just leaves you with so many more questions than answers.
yeah, I was going to say, on top of that, it indicates that she doesn't necessarily have the type of injuries to the soft tissues and cartilage around her neck that would go with having a belt around her neck.
Exactly. And it goes from a belt to a cloth at the end. It's like they refer to it at the very end as a cloth instead of a belt after they stated it was a belt at the beginning of the report. So it's like it kind of got like they kind of started going backwards a little bit at the end.
And she does have a little bit of alcohol in her system, but that's really all they reference, and that could be from the decomp.
Yeah, and it's also less than the legal limit, or if not,
definitely the legal limit of that time. Yeah.
And see, to me, like, none of that. I mean, it matters. I don't want anybody to get
obviously
the wrong impression, but like, none of it really matters. I mean, even if she was coked out and drunk, like, this still is not adding up. And it's
Exactly.
outrageous to me. Now, we may cut this part out, but I'd like to know, you just want attention brought to this in hopes of getting somewhere with it, right?
I mean, at this point, I just never thought I'd have to literally like, I mean, I guess growing up, you're always like, yeah, the police are good people. They do the right thing. They always help you when you're in distress or need help. Except they don't, I guess. I've never had this
No.
problem before. Like I've never
Yeah.
had to ask the police to help me like I have now, and then just being completely disregarded, I guess.
And I feel like it's probably a matter of, I guess, maybe finding the right person to help. That's what I'm
Mm,
thinking. And
mm.
I have no idea who that might be. But there's got to be somebody who. Now, is there a suspect?
According to Dallas PD, I'm not completely sure. I don't think so, but according to my mother, yes. So, again, I mean, these are just questions I have as well, and I can't get them answered for some reason.
Yeah, so
Sure.
let's talk about that for a second without naming any people.
Right.
So I think Meg is asking where we typically go with this, and I agree with her to some extent. But if they thought of it as an overdose in the trunk, then it's less a suspect and more a person with more knowledge of what's going on that they should have been looking for. And at the time, she did have a boyfriend.
Yeah.
And it
He,
was his car, right?
Yeah.
but he does not like, he doesn't seem to be the focus of any type of investigation because of how they go from cocaine overdose to undetermined.
And my understanding was that he was aware that she had the car and that she was going to go on a trip. And that's why he
Yeah,
wasn't
she was
necessarily
yeah, she
concerned.
was coming to Kansas to visit my mom the next morning, the night she was killed or whatever.
And so the boyfriend didn't necessarily find it odd that she was missing and the car was missing.
Correct, because he figured she was in Kansas with it, and they didn't have cell phones or anything, obviously back then. So it's
Sure.
not like they called and texted or checked in or whatever at that point.
So he wouldn't necessarily be my like first thought, but it would go to whomever she was last with.
and
And
but he
I
would
don't.
still know something, even if it's like the
Oh,
crowd of
sure.
people running around with, or just any. I mean, he knows something, whether it's answers that would solve it or not. He still knows something.
Sure. Yeah.
So one of the things that shocked me about this case when I first started talking to you is I thought it would be very easy to go, all right, there's a body in the trunk of a car in Texas in 1985. I can find that pretty easily. Turns out there were dozens of cases in Texas in 1985 where bodies were found in the trunk of cars, including at the airport, including multiple men in the trunk of the same car in 1984 and 1985. What's interesting, though, is when you start digging into this case, there was a lot of information about those other trunk bodies and the grand jury indictments and the investigations by multiple agencies. For some reason, this one case just goes completely under the radar. Did you ever get the sense, and then I want to talk about something that was going on between your mom and her. Did you ever get the sense that maybe people thought Katrina was up to no good and that's a reason to discount her?
Oh, absolutely, definitely. I mean, and she might have been, regardless, but she's still a human, and still needs, justice regardless. But I mean, yeah, I mean, she's a 24-year-old, childless, free to an extent, like, individual just trying to figure out her life at 24 years old. Like, a lot of 24-year-olds are probably making bad decisions and good ones. I don't know. But I mean, that's just kind of how life goes.
So what was your mom's relationship like with her sisters in 1985?
They were closer than ever. They've always been very close. They remained close. My mom went to Dallas all the time. My aunts were back in Kansas all the time. They saw each other all the time. They talked all the time. At least my mom and my Aunt Katrina did. Joanne was a little bit more, I think, aloof and distanced, like herself personally a little bit. She was more, I guess, of the wild card a little bit. But my mom and the oldest one, Katrina, were, that was her idol. Quote from her, not me.
I don't think we addressed this here, but I saw it in one of the articles, maybe over at the Unsolved website that I had pulled up on this. They talked a little bit about sort of the day or two prior where there was an argument between your mom and Katrina. And essentially, there was a hang-up phone call. I don't even know that kids really understand what it is to be hung up on today. Do you?
I know, it's crazy.
Do you remember the big heavy phones in like relatives' houses or your house?
Okay. Oh yes. And even the flip phones, you get mad at someone and just snap that thing shut, like screw you. All angrily. No, my mom and her got into an argument the last time they spoke, and my mom hung up on her, which is pretty common with sisters. And then that was the last time she ever spoke with her, and then never saw her again. And then a week later found out she had been killed or died or whatever they called it then.
How much do you think that last interaction between the two of them affected your mom going forward from them?
I don't think it is even a question. I know it affected her more than anyone could probably imagine. Again, she was pretty sensitive and really wore her heart on her sleeve. And that pretty much is probably been her biggest life regret for her entire life.
Do you know, and this might be personal, but what was the fight about?
I'm not even really sure. To be honest
probably
with you.
Nothing of like relevance to what ended up happening.
No, it was pretty common. They'd fight sometimes. I mean, yeah. My mom just figured she'd see her when she got here or whatever.
Sure. Yeah. No,
again, my mom liked to argue quite a bit, to be fair. And I know we've addressed that, but she was a feisty one.
So referencing back to the body discovery, and also I think Stories of the Unsolved, you talked to those guys at some point, and they put out a nice article that I'll include in the show notes for folks who just want to read this in a more linear fashion. They pull from one of the newspaper articles I have here, and it like gives the briefest blurb about this, about your aunt. It says that on June 25th, 1985, the manager of the Casa 3 apartments, and the address here is over at, it looks like 200 South Marsalis Avenue, although I would say it's definitely, I don't think that building is there anymore, if that's the case. Someone was walking by an alley. They noticed a strong odor, and it's coming out of this 1978 Ford LTD that's parked nearby. She contacts the Southwest Station.
I don't think it was actually somebody walking by. I'm pretty sure the story that I was always told anyway is that it was somebody that actually lived in the apartments that was also like the office manager of the apartment complex.
I've seen it reported that way as well. There. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's how I had always been told the story. And so I'm not positive on that, but I'm pretty sure that's how that went. And that's why she had noticed it there that Saturday before and finally ended up calling the police or whatever. I don't think it was like a walk by type of thing though. Like some, I think might lead to believe.
Okay. Well, that's why I was asking you about it, because I've seen it reported, like, and as the petitions, gathered steam, other people grab articles and put things up. I wanted to I wanted to sort of ask you about it from your recollection. I did notice that there was a sentence in here I wanted to ask about. It says that police initially tried to put Katrina's death down as a suicide,
Hmm.
and later it was deemed to be an unexplained death. So was the idea that she got in the trunk of her boyfriend's car and
For real.
strangled
I
herself?
know where you're going with this. I know. And then wrapped herself in a bed sheet like a burrito and then somehow managed to lock herself in the trunk.
Yeah, that's what I'm picturing. Totally makes
And
sense.
then just sat there until she died or something.
That's definitely like a way to torture yourself if you really want to go out in the worst way possible. Because I'm pretty sure
Literally.
that June 1985 Dallas in the trunk of a car, you could only get hotter than that if you were like somewhere in South America.
Exactly.
Or the surface of the
freaking
sun.
rainforest. Yeah.
Well,
Exactly.
so clearly that didn't happen, and I'm gonna say it's got to be incompetence, because I don't even know that you could get there with malfeasance. I mean, it's just not logical. It's not a logical conclusion either way, even when they switch to undetermined.
And it's still not logical whether you're in law enforcement or if you're just regular old Joe off the street. Like, nobody would come to that conclusion whether they were an expert on the matter or not.
Right. It's just not something that's going to happen. And so, that's really where everything starts failing. And that's right after it happens.
This brings us to the point where there is like a couple of mentions online of an investigation. I will say that investigation to me looks like a single incident report and an autopsy report. Does that sound right to you?
Mm-hmm. And even the investigation that was done is very minimal.
Yeah.
To put it like strongly, even.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. And we ran into this one thing that I'm still looking for, this one piece of information, but I want to clarify that we included in this part of the story. I want to clarify with you. So there's the boyfriend who has this Ford LTD that she's found in the trunk of. And then there's someone they reference who they call him Pee-wee. And they indicate that your aunt and Pee-wee were close friends. And it's alleged that Pee-wee had a crush on your aunt, and some of the stories that people are putting out there now.
Mm-hmm.
So your mom, without using any real names, did she know the identity of the boyfriend?
And we're going off of the fact that these are two different people, because some people have assumed that they were the same, but these technically, as far as I know anyway, are two different people, the boyfriend and Pee-wee. And so the identity of the boyfriend in particular, she did not know exactly who that was.
But if she was found in his car, the police should know who it was. Well, they should know. That doesn't
They
mean
should, but they won't answer.
Oh, really?
Yeah. They won't answer the phone or answer the question or anything for that matter. I can't, like, it's a pretty simple question to ask, and you'd think a simple answer to get an answer to, but like, it's apparently not.
Our thing was, when we first started talking, who is the boyfriend, and like, can we confirm his identity? And then, who is Pee-wee? Is he different than the boyfriend? Which I stand on the fact that I think he's different. Otherwise, I don't think it would be a question. If he's also the boyfriend and they have the plates on the car, all those things, there's no reason for Pee-wee to be a question mark. So he's got to be a different person.
It is a different person. Yeah, for sure.
And we do have like some suspicion of who maybe Pee-wee could be.
Yeah, my mom knew who Pee-wee's real name is.
And that's someone that you've done, I'll call it a deep dive on his background.
Mm-hmm.
Have you ever talked to him?
No.
Is he alive?
As far as I know, yes.
I also believe that he's alive. I can't prove that 100%, but I'm.
I don't want to like say for sure or not, but I mean, from what I've found, I'm like 95% sure he's still alive, unless he just recently died or something.
Yeah, well,
So we're going to end up coming back to Katrina as we go along here, but I want to sort of move around in time. It's 1985 when this happens to her. You're not even on the planet yet.
Exactly.
and as you described, in the first episode covering this, a couple of years after this, your parents end up getting married, and you were born 1991. You are the namesake for Katrina.
Correct.
So your mom still has several siblings at the time that you were born.
Mm-hmm. And a sister, Joanne, which I met, and then her brothers. Yeah.
So in 1993, is this also in Dallas?
Yes.
Okay, so in Dallas, Texas, 1993, you're a couple years old. There is another bizarre thing that happens, and it's now happening to you, whereas Katrina happens to your mom and her family, and to Katrina, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
But now you're here. You're in your mom's custody and care. Were your parents divorced at that time, or is it a little later?
No. This is at this point, my mom and dad are happily married or whatever, and then my Aunt Joanne is murdered, and then at that time is when things start really shifting in the family dynamic, and my mom is back and forth between Dallas and Kansas so much for the trial and the prosecution of this case. And I'm only 2, but I usually stay in Kansas with my dad at this point, and my paternal grandmother helps my dad take care of me while my mom is back and forth so much. And of course, she's got like a full-time job and a career and everything as well. So she is caught up in the middle of this trial and this prosecution as well, and then has a newborn or a couple-year-old baby, and it's just chaos at that point. Yeah.
So what happened to your Aunt Joanne?
She had her throat slit with a broken beer bottle in a motel room.
And was it by someone she knew, or was it a stranger?
I mean, I don't think they knew each other very well. I think my mom had always referred to it, as like a date rape type of situation. However, I'm not really sure which of them was actually date raping the other, so to speak. That killing was a little bit of a different, basis than my other aunt. So that one's a little hard to comment on in those terms, but it was never like an investigation of who did it. I mean, they always knew who did it. The motel room was registered and, to the name of the person that did it. It was never I didn't do that situation. It was just never in question ever.
This is hard to ask because you were so small, but do you remember the chaos? Do you remember feeling I'm always at grandma's house, or I'm always with my dad during that time?
No, I mean, I was a pretty actually well-adjusted child for both of my parents, actually, and they remained very close friends my entire life. I actually get along almost too well for being divorced like they were, but they really prioritized me, I think, in my well-being in terms of their own relationship. So, I mean, even when my son was just born in 2018, my mommy and my dad were staying in my house under my roof with me when I had my son. So together
that's really good.
Yeah. So, I mean, they've always, put me in front of their own differences, I guess you could say. My mom never, she never failed to call and give my dad a good talking to any time I called her upset about something. So, I mean, but no, it's not like that at all. I remember the falling out between my mom and dad, kind of, not necessarily like specific events, but like the vibes and, the feelings and stuff. Like, I remember bits and pieces like of when they split up and how things went downhill. And I mean, I've also, of course, heard stories and stuff, but my mom was very, very upset. Of course, at this point, she was very distraught and very reckless, pretty much a downward spiral of self destruction at this point. And she was also very upset by the rest of her family's reaction to her only other sister being brutally murdered or whatever. She was the only family member who showed up or went to any of the prosecution or court proceedings or trial of anything that happened in Joanne's killing ever.
Why was that? In your opinion, why was she the only one?
I honestly don't know, but I mean, it still kind of seems that way to this day with other family members.
But so with your Aunt Joanne, her murder, it was not a mystery. It was a situation that unfolded, and it sounds like to have your throat slit with a beer bottle, it's probably out of some sort of anger or something like that happening. And so it's a completely different situation than with your Aunt Katrina, but your mom has now lost two. I assume that they were probably, frenemies, but also like best friends because they are so close in age and sisters, right? I mean,
Yeah.
And so she's lost a big chunk of her world, and I assume
a huge chunk of her world for sure.
And she's probably feeling like really powerless at that point, especially if she's not getting support from the family, the other family members, and maybe they just couldn't handle it. I have no idea, but it seems like she would be like really alone, and that would be a really hard thing to go through like that because she's traveling back and forth, leaving her small child, trying to watch justice unfold for one of her sisters. And that it's got to weigh on her mind that she lost her other sister and the investigation is, not happening or whatever her frame of mind was at that time. So I imagine all that was really hard.
Yes, yeah, for sure. And also, like, I know that in Joanne's case, it is known to be, I think, viewed more as a maybe she kind of had it coming, or maybe she should have been more careful after what happened to her first sister type of, I think, view is what people were kind of seeing it as.
That's really unfortunate.
Is that in her circle or in the family circle? Is that like from Texas or Kansas?
From the whole family's in Kansas, from the Kansas
version. Yes. Family members kind of thinking that. Okay.
And I can sort of see that, but I also have a very strong sort of opinion that a victim is a victim is a victim, right?
Exactly.
And so I feel like that would have been a really hard thing for your mom to have to say, well, she's still a victim. And, as far as having it coming, that it's unfortunate that it would be seen that way.
There's no excuse for that, truly. I mean, there's probably some things she could have done differently to prevent it, sure, but nobody knows that's going to happen or sees that coming.
Well, sure. And so that case went through the court system, and did the person who did it, were they sentenced and everything?
Yes.
Okay,
yes.
So all of that was adjudicated, and so at least there was a little bit of, I mean, I don't know what happened, but as far as justice goes, there was a case that occurred.
Yeah, and he did serve like 20 years or more, and he has since recently been paroled and released.
Have you met him?
For the sake of the law, no.
Because of how complicated things can be when someone has been convicted, and therefore, if they're on parole, probation, etc., they're not allowed to have any interaction with victims' families. But do you have an impression of the person who killed Joanne?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And have you been, I assume, knowing how you come across, you're pretty curious. What is your impression of him as a person now?
I mean, I don't really have any hard feelings. I kind of, when I had initially learned that he had been released, I wanted to be like, that person that was pissed off, like, hey, why did you do this, asshole? Kind of the thing, but it wasn't like that. There was no defensive stance. There was never an argument about it. It was this person did this and they admitted to it and took responsibility for it. And I guess in the eyes of the law, they did the crime and then they did the time and they paid their dues to society and now they are able to move on with their life, I guess, basically.
Do you feel like your family has been able to do the same thing?
Well, most of them are dead now. My grandparents have since passed away, which were a huge part of this. And then my mom, of course. The only people left really are her brothers, and they don't have any interest at all in any part of any of this, unfortunately.
Do you think I kind of assume that there's not thought to be a connection between your two aunts' deaths?
I mean, it's a good way to think of it. I've thought of it that way, but no, I don't believe there is.
Okay.
What is like the best case scenario with your Aunt Katrina's death right now? Like, what is the thing? I know Meg talked about different people, but like, what is the thing that you need the most in order to proceed in your own investigation? Is it the name of suspects? Like, what is like your next step?
Well, things have shifted a little bit since I had initially started this little quest, I guess. But at this point, I feel like it would probably, be a win if I could actually get some type of acknowledgement or accountability. I mean, ideally, an apology, would be nice to hear. Not that it would really fix it at this point anyway, but anything, any type of information or communication. I feel like, when I ask about it ever, I get the feeling like it's like, well, why do you want to know? What's it to you? Why do you care? Like, this is an ongoing investigation and we can't give you anything except that it's not an ongoing investigation. It never was really. So like, it's just kind of stuck in this gray area where there's no yeses and there's no nos, but there's also nothing in between.
Do you feel like the people you're talking to are taking this matter seriously?
Seriously, I mean, I guess it's kind of just a serious matter in general, but I feel like maybe they are kind of trying to do to me what they did to my mom, but I guess seeing it done to my mom once again has kind of made me pretty much like a pushbacker. Like, nope, seen you do this before. It ain't happening here. Kind of a thing, and I've come to the conclusion that really, like, if they don't give me answers, to be completely honest with you, I can find them myself. And I have so far. I haven't really got any of my information from the police at all that I've found to this point. So I really am not sure if they could really do much at this point anyway, except take responsibility of their negligence.
And we've talked about in a lot of cases, especially cases that are, just shy of 40 years old, when things are being held back and information is being kept away for whatever reason, it's really kind of pointless at that point because so much time has passed. I mean, I just feel like sometimes when the older cases are, being said to, you can't have the information because we're not investigating it. I mean, because we are investigating it, but that they're not investigating it can be really discouraging. And I don't really see the point of law enforcement doing that. It's very discouraging that you're not able to get those answers. And sometimes they feel like they're basically saying, well, I'd love to give you that information, except there's not any, and there's no way for us to get it at this point.
Yeah, I it's frustrating for sure, but I have like, spoken with like the DA and stuff, like, and literally said, I am not working against you. I am trying to work with you. I am trying to give and get information to help this case be solved. I'm literally like doing the hard part for you and trying to just hand this over to you to to do it. Like, there are obviously some things that I can't do that they can or have the power to. And so, yeah, it's frustrating because I'm not really sure why they would see me like as, I guess, working against them as opposed to with them, but they will not work with me whatsoever.
I think that it has to be that they're afraid that you're going to like realize what's not there, which would be, what should be there. But it's not necessarily the people you're talking with now. It's not their fault. It's the whole system. It's the people that were not doing what they should have been doing, 35 years ago.
Yeah. However, I agree with that to an extent, but also, like, for example, I think that because it was so negligent in the beginning, you would think now with and how advanced like technology and even DNA and stuff has gotten, it'd be so much easier to just do it now. Like
I think so. Yeah.
and I know for a fact, and it's been confirmed, that they do still have evidence for this case. And so why they won't communicate or answer me when I ask about getting the DNA from it tested is just infuriating and simply beyond me, and I don't understand it.
Well, they may need some guidance on it, I guess, because the way to do that is what you're doing, which would be to get the word out and get some attention on it, and that way, in a nice way, sort of encourage them.
Yeah, exactly. Except like I don't really know what else to even do because I've actually legitimately really tried to work side by side and communicate for like a couple of years now, and it's just going nowhere. And it's I'm not trying to end up, like my mom or something and like just, have it eat me from the inside out. Like I'm not really one to like, okay, let's wait another year and see what happens. Like my time is valuable for me personally, and I have children of my own that I don't like, my time being taken from them either. So at this point it is kind of personal for me
Well, sure.
in a lot of ways in regards to that. And I don't appreciate the way that they've really given me the runaround and wasted my time.
Well, it sounds like that, you've got your attitude is really good. I have no idea what mine would be in this type of situation, but I want to commend you for that because you're definitely taking the right approach. And it seems like, I'm we'll see. I'm going to think about this now that I've spoken with you, and John will as well. And we'll see what we can help do to, besides getting the story out, like maybe who else we could contact about it. And who knows if it'll get anywhere, but you are absolutely in the right. Your Aunt Katrina deserves justice, just like everybody else that has had something terrible happen to them. And I really hate it that you're having to go through this. It was outrageous when I initially saw your petition that you had put out and the other coverage that it's gotten. It's unnecessary and it really is just terrible.
Yeah, it's frustrating, but I'm trying to remain you know, positive, I guess.
And diligent, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I'm also very like direct, I guess. And it might come off as a little confrontational sometimes to some people, but I mean, I'm not really trying to beat around the bush either. And I know that that's pretty much all I've been or experienced this far. And so I'm just like trying to get somewhere, anywhere at this point.
Well, I find it fascinating that like there's a lot of forensic genealogists out there right now, and a lot of like cold case folks when it comes to missing people and unidentified people. There's like DNA Doe Project. Plus, you have the other side of that coin, which is like the Innocence Projects and all of the iterations of that. But there's not as many resources when the cops just sort of decided a thing 37 years ago that they didn't follow up so much on. And I think that part, that's something, it's interesting, but that's a need that could be addressed when it comes to these barely homicides. I mean, and that's not in terms of the case. The case is clearly a homicide, but in terms of paper, they barely allowed it to be the homicide that it was.
And that's why it's so difficult to get any help with it, is because technically, if anybody does contact the police about it, they will tell them that it is not technically classified as a homicide.
Or they'll tell them that it's open and they can't give any information about it because it's an open and ongoing case, which is, Meg can tell you, that is particularly with the state of Texas, that is one of my number one pet peeves on the planet, because you get a certain amount of time, and then as far as I'm concerned, I don't really think anything should be secret to begin with. You could have a hold back thing or two, but like holding back entire case files for 20 years, 15 years, 10 years, whatever, that's crazy to me. And I understand like there are aspects of cases that should really just be lists. They shouldn't give away like people's personal information, and like they shouldn't go down these terrible investigative rabbit holes where they're putting completely irrelevant interviews in there, although that gets a little dicey. But like things like the boyfriend's identity, Pee-wee's identity, if the police knew who he was, those things should be provided to you so you can confirm your own investigation at this point and possibly bring them something back that they don't have to put the resources towards.
And I know a lot of that is absolutely right, because I know over time, as I've learned, a lot of stuff I don't think about initially, just because like I've grown up and heard this or that or heard here and there. And if somebody brings up something that like ignites that memory in my mind, I'll be like, oh yeah, I do remember my mom saying this person had done this or that, or this person's name, or yeah, that sparks a memory in my mind, that name or something like that. But I can't do that unless I can get that feedback, or like, bouncing those ideas off of one another. I just need the other.
Right. No. And, the way that I describe this in a different situation, that it doesn't have like the depth and the level that you have going on here. Your case is so big and sprawling, but also so tiny on paperwork. It's like you have the box cover to a 10,000 piece jigsaw puzzle. But unfortunately, 10 people have the pieces, and you have no idea what the identity of the 10 people with the pieces to your jigsaw puzzle are. You just have 9,000 pieces sitting there that are yours, and you have to go find the other 1,000 from these people to make that picture. It's really weird.
It's like, where's Waldo?
Yep. Thank you for joining us. We are sponsored by LabRottiCreations.com. You can check them out at LabRottiCreations.com, and you can still use the code CRIMEXS for a fun pop pet portrait of your own pet. You can also reach us on Twitter, Instagram at TrueCrimeXS, or you can give us a call if you know anything about any of the cases that we're talking about at 252-365-5593. You can also reach us at Gmail at truecrimexs@gmail.com, and you can check out our website at www.truecrimexs.com. We'll see you next time.
This is True Crime XS.
A couple of things have happened in true crime news. I've been out. I've been away from our normal recording time, so we're recording this very early in the morning on a Sunday, and there was one specific thing that like really stuck out to me in the news, and that was they released the Gabby Petito Brian Laundrie confession note. Did you see this?
I did.
So they released two versions of it, and there's one that's like a handwritten version. It's slightly more detailed, but it's kind of got some blurry spots on it. And they released like this version where it was like typed up so you could read it. So his story, Brian Laundrie's story, that he makes this dying declaration essentially, is that Gabby Petito was injured while they were out gallivanting in the wilderness, and that if we are to believe what he wrote, it was a pretty severe injury, and that her death was some kind of inane moment where he thought of it as a mercy killing, where he was like stuck between a rock and a hard place, and he felt like he was actually helping her.
Right. And so to sort of elaborate on that, they were traveling around in their travel van, and I didn't completely understand everything, but my understanding was they were out somewhere, and they were in a new area, and the temperature suddenly dropped, it wasn't like that was abnormal. It was just that they weren't used to it. And as it was getting dark, they were trying to get back to the car, and she fell in the stream. What did he call it? A stream or a river?
A creek? I think he called it a creek. Yeah.
And she had fallen. He heard her fall. He went back to get her. He had carried her as far as he could go. He didn't know how far away they were from the car. So I'm assuming like this is happening as it gets dark quickly, right?
Right.
Basically, she was injured. He knew she was injured, and he said he tried to make a fire, and it's really hazy. But I have to say, this scenario that is kind of splayed out as, and it is his dying declaration, actually, I mean, I didn't actually go here to this particular scenario, but if you recall when we talked about it, I said the whole time that I felt like he probably lost his temper and it was an accident, right?
Yeah.
Now, while not an accident, it was in fact what he considered to be a mercy kill. Now, he still killed her, right?
Yeah.
I felt like, especially, I mean, this kid got raked over the coals. I mean,
and his family
continues to be raked over the coals. And this furthers my opinion that he didn't tell his parents any of this stuff.
No.
He never looked at it like he had murdered Gabby, because I don't feel like he felt like he did murder her. We never know what the situation's going to be like. I don't feel like he could have made that account up.
No, I believe it. Even if it's not 100% true, I believe it's 100% truthful from his perspective. Yeah. I mean, I think the truth is he panicked, and he did a series of things that were terrible. And this just proves that the entire internet and mainstream media just have no idea like how to talk about things. Yeah, like, so this comes about and this gets released because her family is suing his family, which is, about as dumb as you can get. And I'm not calling the Petito family dumb. I'm talking about the lawyers who talked them into doing this.
Well, sure. And I think part of the problem was, Brian left his family. I feel like he left them in the dark. And I feel like they were probably really like sideswiped, blindsided by this, because, like I had pictured just based on what was available, Brian wasn't really capable of like some sort of heinous murder, right?
Yeah.
we talked at length about, I think it was sort of in between where she was really missing and when she was found. He was just, I said like he was lucky to have her, and she was his entire life. If you go back and listen to some of those episodes, like I had a really good take on this because he says in his dying declaration, she was my whole life. I could not go on after I killed her essentially to put her out of her misery, because I feel like it could have been exaggerated. I don't know how badly she was hurt, but we do know that there was contact with police. I watched that entire interaction from the body cam footage, several hours of it. And that's where I formed my opinions that I previously stated with regard to that case. And, I know that a lot of people talk about it, but I haven't found a whole lot of people who've actually watched the entire thing. And so I feel like that's a really good thing to that's the best part of the investigation I could come up with, because there's not like a whole lot to sort of see. I don't feel like they were doing well. And as far as eating properly, mentally, we know that they were they were on edge, perhaps not taking medications. And, being out in the wilderness, I feel like, especially if you're young and you're in like fairly good spirits to begin with, I feel like you could not be completely aware of how devastated your body has become based on the elements around you. Does that make sense? Because I feel like they weren't eating properly. They were probably dehydrated. There was probably all kinds of stuff that weakened them, Gabby in particular, that made this, like, whatever happened, her fall, right, to seem like it was this drastic thing. And it's so sad, right?
Well, we talked about in the last episode the case of Riley Connor, and one of the things I learned from that was the forensic folks involved there had a pretty firm, on both sides, had a pretty firm belief that sometime in the 20s, your frontal lobe developed and you start to get like some of your better common sense out of life. This is very dramatic. This note is very dramatic. The story he tells, it's very dramatic. It reminded me of something I would see on Netflix or I would see on Hulu. And it's like, it's sort of this sprawling story he tells where in his mind, and I had pictured it, and I think I even said in the other episodes, I had pictured it, I think similar to how you had pictured it, that it was just like sort of this snap thing. But I don't think that anymore. I think this was I think this is more of a whittle away thing. And I think this is a panic killing.
I don't know that he panicked. I feel like he didn't want her to suffer.
Yeah.
And I feel like I can imagine being in over your head, which you absolutely would be if you were out in, real wilderness and, unable to get back to your vehicle, which is what they were trying to do. And I think that their trip should have ended, probably a couple weeks after it started, because I just don't feel like they were equipped to do what they were doing.
I don't think either one of these kids had any business being on a cross country anything yet. They might have in 5 or 6 years, but they're not there.
Well, and being inadequately prepared is a good indication that, especially for something like this, it's a good indication that they weren't ready for something like this, this type of trip. They didn't have the light that they needed to make it back to their vehicle.
Yep.
Which is insane to me. And, you have to be sort of vigilant when you're out in the wilderness. I'm not an outdoorsy type person. I don't care. I mean, I feel like the outdoors is beautiful at times, but I don't like bugs and heat and all that stuff. But, if I were going to be out, I would definitely, even if I left in the morning and, had plans to be back by lunch, I would still have a flashlight with me, probably more than one flashlight.
Well, I mean, so I'm like right in the middle. I've had times in my life where I've been a very outdoorsy person, and like even in recent years, I've spent a lot of time in exactly the national parks they're talking about here, and like I like going out there and spending time there. But as I get older, I like having some kind of hotel room to go back to or something. Like I'm not in the same shape I was when I was. Well, I guess these guys are 22 years old. I'm not in the same shape now. So that's what makes me do that. But when I was 22 years old, a sleeping bag didn't bother me. Sleeping out on a porch or a deck or under the stars in an unknown area, that didn't bother me so much. I will say I've been lost, like even in the last couple of years. I got into a park that I think was about 3,000 acres. It's not a huge park, but I had this is when I met my wife. She and I went out. We didn't have lights with us, but we were really just planning on having an hour hike. And that hour hike was going to be from 6:30 to 7:30. And then the sun was going to set after 8, but we were already going to be back to our car and gone. We had left our phones behind because we were trying to have dates early on when we started our relationship where we were paying attention to each other. We weren't paying attention to like incoming text messages from whoever or whatever. And we left our phones behind. I had a flashlight with me, but the flashlight broke. The button on it broke while we were out there, and we had only taken one of our dogs. But the two of us were lost for hours. We were lost for like 6 hours in a park that's like between two major metropolitan areas. You know what I mean? So it wasn't even like a national park issue. I think the biggest trouble they had here, and I'll agree with you on they weren't prepared and there was probably something going on in terms of diet and dehydration. I think the biggest trouble they had was the weather. The change in weather from Utah, where everything was sort of blaring hot for them at the national park, they were suddenly in an area where it was below freezing or dropped to freezing. And I think that part, being ill prepared for that part, and this is how my mind works. If they don't have light that they probably need, and they don't have warmth that they probably need, my guess is they probably also don't have water. Like really, like water.
Right, except for like this creek, right?
Right. And I'm not sure that they would know how to adapt that to make it drinkable.
And I feel like if like I said, I watched the video and you can see that Gabby had a tendency, like you could tell how upset she was in the video. And so, if she was like seriously injured, I can imagine it would grate on someone's nerves, right?
It would amplify as well.
It would. And because of that, I do feel like that he thought that he was mercy killing her. I do not feel like that is grounded in any sort of reality. I cannot imagine a situation where a young, vital, healthy person would fall in a creek and then require to be euthanized or whatever you want to say. It was all circumstantial things that kept happening, like they couldn't get back to the car and he was desperate. And, I feel like it was all exaggerated and senseless, right? And the way that this sort of crime is prevented, because I do feel like it was a crime, even though.
Oh, this is totally murder. Like, I just want to make sure that this is murder. He just is justifying in a way that I totally believe he screwed all this up and she screwed all this up and they collectively ended up in this situation.
Right. And you never would have dreamed I wouldn't dream this in a million years. Right. And I feel like he realized that nobody was going to believe it. Now, he does state that he's not doing it because he wants to get away with her murder. He did what he did to himself because he couldn't live without her, which is what I said all along, that it didn't make any sense that this guy was going to go off on the run because Gabby was his entire world. And this sort of proves it. Now, that also sort of proves why he would say, I need to kill you because you're in so much pain, because she was his entire world, right? And these types of relationships, as fascinating as they are and as good as they can feel at times, they are so unhealthy.
There's so much, even when I saw them interacting, I was like, oh my God, they're both like, please just pass the lithium and the Valium out in bulk here. Just these people need a tranquilizer because there was so much that needed to be stabilized about their moods and their interactions. And,
if it wasn't on like cops' body cameras, it wouldn't even be an issue because we would know nothing about it. But because it was this evidence that was put out there while she was missing, right? It became sort of this focus, but I feel like a lot of people just sort of skimmed it and didn't really take it all in. But I couldn't figure out if anybody had watched that, how they in turn felt like, Brian had killed her, like a vicious killing of some sort.
Well, I have two guys like Brian Laundrie in my life, and when they were 22 years old, they were those stoic, dealing with something crazy guys. Like they were, to this day, I know how Brian Laundrie would have turned out if he lived to be 45. But the thing is, when sometimes you put people together, like you said, it's unhealthy, it's toxic. Enough mental illness coupled with enough unforeseen circumstances is what caused this. Now, he definitely killed her. He admits he killed her. Like, there's no way I'm giving him an out.
So a lesser infatuated person, okay, would have not felt the need to mercy kill her. And they would have stuck it out, and either she would have died naturally or they would have made it back to the car. Okay,
well,
that's where the logic comes in here.
Yeah. And then a lesser infatuated person would have gotten to Utah when the body camera footage was being taken, and at the end of that adventure, they would have gone, "Huh, I might need to do something different, like leave, go home."
Well, and there's all kinds of stuff to like sort of unpack there, but I feel like this could be a wake-up call, perhaps. If you feel like your loved one, your partner, your girlfriend, boyfriend, significant other, whatever you want to call them, if you feel like they could talk you into mercy killing them, having fallen into a creek while trying to find a vehicle, you are not in the best of relationships.
Yeah, so here's how you guys can take a look at that, and then I'll move on from it with whatever your last words are.
My husband would have dragged me out of the park by my ponytail, probably. Not to be like mean, but just to be like, you're being so dramatic. You've got to stop and you need to come on.
I don't think he would have dragged you out by the ponytail, but I think that he would have tested to see how far you really could move on your own. And then I honestly think he would have walked away and been like, just wait here. I'm going to go find someone. I'll be right back with a person who can handle this. Because there's bound to be someone here in this park. And I think he and also my spouse now would both have just figured out a way to make it a project and manage it.
Right. And I guess and I wasn't in their situation. And quite frankly, I have been where I've been lazy and said, I don't feel like moving anymore. But I've never actually been in a situation where I couldn't physically move anymore.
Yeah.
Have you?
Yeah.
You have been?
Yeah. Yeah. I had a very bad car accident when I was very young, and there just happened to be people nearby. I could not, on my own steam, get myself out of the situation I had gotten myself into. And I was able to get myself away from immediate danger. And I just happened to go the right way, because if I would have gone the other way, I would have been like on the wilderness side of things. But instead I ended up on the road side of things.
Right. And I guess I've never been in a situation where, I wish he didn't even know what her injuries were, except a bump on her head that continued to get worse.
She said her wrist hurt. He goes into this whole spiel, like in this note, but you can find online. All you have to do is look for Brian Laundrie confession note. People put up two versions of it. One's typewritten, one's handwritten. It's all over the place. But in this spiel, it's very dramatic. It's like he's trying to write a Shakespearean sonnet or something to the best of his ability.
It's insane.
If you find yourself in a position where you are writing a Shakespearean sonnet about anything, You're in the wrong place. If you find yourself in a position where it seems like Shonda Rhimes is writing the act of your life that is going on right now, you're in the wrong place. You're doing the wrong thing. Those things never go well. They're so dramatic and they're so toxic and unhealthy for you. And it's not the other person. It's not just you. It's the situation that you're in. Get yourself out of that situation and move on. And I say that with all the love in the world and all the empathy in the world for people. So many things could be avoided if you simply like develop the sense of, oh, well, probably shouldn't be doing this. That's it. If you think to yourself, I probably shouldn't be doing this, it is not your job to overcome that. It is your job to go, why is that? Why is it that I shouldn't be doing this? And people have, the majority of people have that instinct and they go, I'm going to overcome that. No, don't. Your good common sense or conscience or something deep down is telling you, get out, listen to it, find out why. And like these guys had, like, there was so, like, if the cops come up to your car because someone called that you're beating each other and they have a 2-hour body cam of you, them talking to you, and they've told you maybe you should separate, I'm going to help you here. I'm going to give you a huge hint. Regardless of the outcome, whether you're charged with anything or not, just get away from that person. The police have been involved. The power has shifted in your relationship. Something is wrong there. You are not in the 0.01% that's going to overcome that and have a healthy relationship. Okay. The cops were called because people thought you're beating on each other. And this is like days before this happened to them, where he ends up in this mercy killing situation, which is insane. But the cops were called. That's it. It's over.
And that just, it makes me think that because they chose to continue on, right? They were briefly separated, but they got right back together and went on about their business. I feel like it was skewed probably from some sort of physical deficiency, like dehydration or lack of meds or whatever, right? Like this innate.
All of those things probably play. Yeah, it's just a perfect storm for this mercy killing murder that went on. I mean,
the last thing that anybody should ever do. Okay, I understand that, bad things can happen, but if you didn't die when it happened out in the woods, right? Do not mercy kill anybody you're with.
Never euthanize your friends. It's not a thing. It's not a thing at all.